Hi, everyone. So here I just want to do a quick little demonstration of how to do a repeated measures ANOVA. And just remember that repeated measures essentially means the same thing as within subjects is the term I taught you for this before. So what that means again is just instead of having our independent variable manipulated across different groups of people, in this instance, we have an IV that's manipulated, as the name suggests, within subjects, so within the same group of people. So we're just taking multiple repeat measurements from the same group of people. So the setup for this in SPSS, basically going to be the same as what we saw for a dependent samples t-test. The only difference being that we have additional levels, so additional measurements that were taken. So I just set up a little hypothetical example here. And this is basically how you would want your data set up if you're going to do a repeated measures ANOVA. So I actually just have a first variable here, just tracking which subject we're talking about. You don't really need this, strictly speaking. Sometimes you'll see this in data sets that you can just record kind of like a subject ID, unique identifier for each person in your data set. But you can also just use, obviously, the standard sort of each row in the data set reflects one person. So we already know that. But we have, you see, 3 different variables here. Just imagine kind of a hypothetical study where we did some sort of intervention or training program or something. And let's say we had sort of follow-up surveys that we did 1 month after this intervention, 3 months in, or 3 months after, and then 6 months after. So we have these 3 sets of measurements, but they're all taken from, again, the same group of people, right? So this is subject 1. All 3 of these measurements come from subject 1. So that's, again, the main difference from a between subjects or the one-way ANOVA that I showed you before, where different groups, different levels of that IV. Okay, so how would I analyze this in SPSS? So we're going to go to Analyze, General Linear Model. So before I showed you this for the one-way ANOVA, you would just use this univariate option right here. So now instead of that, we're going to go down to repeated measures right here. So you hit repeated measures, and then you get this little window. So this is new. This is not something you would have seen in this class in SPSS before. So the first thing this is asking you to do is give a name to whatever the within subjects factor is. So here the question is essentially just what is your independent variable? Just wants you to kind of give a label to that factor so that it knows what to call it in the output. It knows how to label it in your output. So here, kind of what we're talking about essentially is time. It's kind of not really a manipulation, but we're just measuring something at various time points. So time seems like a sensible label in this case. And then they just want to know how many levels are there of that variable. So we have 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month measured across 3 different levels. And you can just hit add. And then you have that show up here. So you have this within subjects variable that's called time, and it has 3 levels. And then next you hit define. Okay, and then you'll see this. Now this is kind of similar to the other windows that we've seen for other analyses. Now the new thing is this, right? So you just told SPSS that you have this within subjects factor, within subjects variable that has 3 different levels. Now you see these question marks here, and it's basically just asking you to specify, okay, what are the 3 variables that kind of capture those 3 different levels? So obviously that's just these 3 variables for us. So you can just drag those over one by one. So we have 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month. And then at this point, for just kind of the simple version, this would be kind of analogous to like the one-way ANOVA that I showed you before. It's just a one-way repeated measures instead of between subjects ANOVA now. We don't need to worry about any of the stuff over here, but a lot of what I said for other analyses with these other boxes will also apply here. So there's things like you can click on options. If you want to get, say, estimates of effect size, you can do that. You can get descriptive statistics. But just for the basic analysis, at this point, we're pretty much good to go. Hit OK. And so we want to remember what is the question that this analysis would be testing. And it's basically just against a null hypothesis that all 3 of these groups, the means for these groups are entirely equal. So in this case, that would be saying that time had no effect, essentially, right? There's no difference between the 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month groups in their means. So we're testing whether that is the case or not, essentially. Are there any significant differences among these three means? Was there some effect of time? And so we get a whole bunch of output here, different things that this will give us. The main table that we're going to be interested in, though, is this one. This is going to give you the basic significance test, tests of within subjects effects. And then this is a little more complicated than the other output we've seen because they're giving you basically 4 different versions of the same hypothesis test that all make slightly different assumptions, essentially. So these can be appropriate tests under slightly different circumstances. We're not going to get into the weeds of that in this course. So for our purposes, you can just look at the top row here, the sphericity assumed row, and let's just go with this to get our F ratio and significance level. So this is basically, what is the effective time? What is the within subjects now effective time? You get your F ratio right here. Significance gives you the p-value. And then since we also asked for those effect sizes, we get the eta squared, same thing as r squared, remember, of 0.054. And then obviously if we had more than one independent variable, once we start to get into factorial designs, which you can also do with within subjects factors, those would just show up here as kind of multiple boxes in this table. So you'd have time, and then you'd also have whatever your second independent variable is, and then you'd have things like interaction effects. Okay, so that's the essentials of repeated measures ANOVA in SPSS.